Perfect. So I think it's about 90 people. So we'll get started and then go over the questions. Okay, guys. So welcome to the, I hope you're enjoying the medical school symposium. So I guess today and right now I'll be sort of covering how to do well on the MCAT. What are some of the tips that I use? What are the strategies that I used? And how you guys can move forward with the MCAT. So just a little bit about me. So I finished up my second year of med school at Western. I also did my undergrad at Western in their med sci program. So if anyone's here from Western, I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. I'm from Toronto. So actually I'm from Vaughan, so just north of Toronto. And I'm a basketball enthusiast. So even before the Raptors won, I have all the Raptors gears. I've been to a lot of Raptors games. And yeah, so that's basically, I guess you could call me the second super fan. Yeah, so I guess what we'll be doing with this presentation is sort of, I'll be going over the structure of the MCAT, because a lot of people have questions with that, especially with COVID. And then I'll be going over some tips and strategies and then going over a Q&A. So what is the structure of the MCAT, right? So someone mentioned that, how is the situation going on in COVID-19? So with the recent updates, AMC, who hosts the MCAT, they sort of update the
Can you share your screen? Can you share your screen? This is Leo from the founder of
Oh, was my
FutureMeMD.
shirt
Yeah,
not okay?
just to show them the presentation.
Okay, well, how does that go? I apologize for that. Oh, okay, perfect. There you go. I apologize for that, guys.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Okay, perfect. No worries. Okay, so I'll go again quickly. Okay, so welcome to the FutureMeMD Symposium, and this is sort of how to do well on the MCAT. Again, a little bit about me. Western, native Toronto, basketball enthusiast. Okay, so what is the structure of the MCAT? So sort of MCAT right now, from May 29th to September 20th, during this COVID period, is sort of, they modified the sort of the structure of the MCAT. As many of you may be aware, they sort of have limited dates with more availability. So how they do it is that they have three tests per day rather than just one test per day, which you have 6:30 a.m., you have 12 p.m., and you have 6:30 p.m. So sort of it's 5 hours and 45 minutes, and I'll be going over the standard, the normal structure after this. So sort of how it works is that there's 4 sections: chem and bio, critical, which is cars, uh, chem and physics, and then bio is the third, and then psych and soc is the fourth. There's different amounts of time, and sort of during COVID, AMC is updating their centers. So test centers are being open according to the municipalities that are opening up. So something like Toronto is not going to have centers open as soon as other municipalities that are being opened up. So when you guys are looking for test centers to book your MCAT, if you haven't done so, please just stay up to date with the AMC website, their Twitter feed. They're putting up regular updates regarding that. Next. So the regular format for the MCAT is about 7 hours and 33 minutes. Again, everything's the same. It's just there's more time devoted for each of the sections. Again, the breaks, there's 3 breaks. All 3 breaks are optional. However, I do suggest and recommend taking all of them, as they can provide sort of this mental break, let you go to the washroom, get a quick bite to eat. So definitely utilize all the breaks. And at the end, there's some survey questions. And so the void question, if anyone's concerned about that, it's sort of like at the end of the MCAT, you have an option. Do you want to get a score for it? Or do you not want to get a score? Because a lot of times some people might feel after writing the exam, it didn't go well and they do not want to have a score. They don't want to have it recorded. So it's really, that's the option what that is. So sort of the breakdown, this is again for the regular 7 hour and 33 minute exam, sort of how the new MCAT, which was modified in 2015, has sort of changed. So it's more focused on biochem and bio for the bio sections. Again, more psych than soc for the psych-soc section, and much less organic chem as previous exams pre-2015. So that's sort of the breakdown that can sort of help you study on how much time to devote to each of the sections. So I guess let me go over some general tips. And then I sort of have 5 tips. The first one is definitely give yourself time. And this is something that I've learned a lot when I was studying for my MCAT, as well as a lot of, I've seen a lot of people. So I personally suggest devoting about 3 months of studying. Again, this varies depending on personal commitments. I know a lot of individuals are, doing research positions during the summer, or doing other jobs and have family commitments or whatnot. So definitely when I say about 3 months of studying, that is with minimal commitment, with about 6 to 7 hours of studying per day, about 5 to 6 days a week. So I'll be going over a sample study schedule towards the end of this presentation. So again, this, if you need more time, if you have more commitments, definitely that can stretch to 3 to 6 months even. So if you give yourself enough time, because what my recommendation is, it's better to invest adequate time writing it once than sort of trying to rush it and having to rewrite multiple times, trying to obtain the score that you desire. So it's sort of an investment in time. Second, it's sort of build a schedule, right? And this is very imperative because it sort of allows you to stay on track. This is what I did. So I took about a day before I started my MCAT studying to sort of build a schedule. Initially, it was very, very rough. It was like, this is how many weeks I'm going to, study for content. This is how much I'm going to do for review. And these are when I'm going to do my full lengths. Again, I'll be going over what full lengths and practice materials are later. So again, it's okay to start rough, but then as you start progressing with studying, then you can start, putting in more concrete study schedule, what you will study for this day, what you will study for this week. And I think it allows you to stay on track and make sure you stick with it, because a lot of times, there's a lot of things, especially if a lot of people are hoping to write in the summer, which I personally wrote in the summer. I wrote my MCAT in September. So I had the entire summer to study for the MCAT, so which a lot of undergrads, especially in Canada, usually do. So there's a lot of things going on in the summer, and deviating from the schedule is very easy. So definitely don't use the "I'll study whenever I can," because that's a very dangerous plan to get yourself into. And do a plenty of practice full lengths. So a lot of times, initially when studying for the MCAT, if it's your first time, especially studying for the MCAT, a lot of times, a lot of students want to do, let me go over all the content. I want to, know all the content first before I go into practice exams or go into practice questions. And I think that's very dangerous as well, because doing practice full lengths will sort of help your brain get used to being in stressful being in stressful situations, helping your brain get used to, like, it's a 7-hour exam if you're writing regularly, or it's 5.5 hours during COVID, and it is a lot of time, and you have to be fully focused the entire duration. So continue, start those full lengths early. You won't get the score, the desired score right away, right? And that's what scares a lot of students, I believe, that they'll get a low score initially, and that might sort of steer them away from continuing to study. But rather use that as a motivation to continue to get those higher scores. You might start off at a 490, right? My first score when I did my first full length, I started at a 498. And with the real exam, by the time I was able to write it, I was able to get a 520. So again, it's just about, it's a rate, it's a marathon, right? So you just got to keep going and record your scores, right? See how you're doing overall. Find a study buddy. I think this is a huge, huge thing that I suggest. I had 2 study buddies when I was sort of studying for my MCAT. And I think having a study partner is so helpful because, first of all, it allows you to share resources. It allows you to stay motivated, right? When you want to get sidetracked, or when you're not feeling, that motivation to continue studying, your study buddy can be that quick break or that quick source of motivation that, that, hey, keep going, let's go, we got this. And I think that having a study buddy is super important. So definitely find that. And I think there's a lot of resources as well at your local libraries, or even at your local schools or Facebook groups, where you can sort of find study buddies for MCAT. And tip five, I think this is very important, is taking the necessary time to de-stress, right? Studying can be a grueling process, and you need to take care of yourself, right? I think a lot of people are like, if I take time to, de-stress or take care of myself, I'm taking away time from studying. I could have learned this, or I could have done an extra practice exam, for example. But I think what is important to remember that, we're human. We need to slow down sometimes, and it's a marathon. And that, taking those times to just relax or hang out with family and friends can actually keep you motivated in the long term, right? So definitely take that time and incorporate that into your schedule. So sort of those were my five main tips, what I found when I was studying. So a big question that a lot of students have is, should I take a course or study on my own, right? And I was conflicted with the same dilemma. Princeton Review offers courses, Kaplan offers courses, and a lot of times these courses can be a couple of $1,000s, right? It's a lot of money. So I think when analyzing whether to take a course or not, the things that I focused on was finances. Second, I focused on what a lot of these courses are in such centers that are not easy to travel to. Like, do I have transportation to get to these centers? And what I did was I looked at the schedules of these courses. So I was considering Princeton. So I looked at the schedule and see, okay, so this is how they sort of break down their course, and I found it was a little bit too slow, right? So it really depends on what your skill sets are, what you're looking for. Princeton, I feel a course can be helpful if you're looking for a lot of resources, can help you sort of manage your time if you have a hard time doing that, right? So after considering all those things, I sort of didn't go to um, a course, but rather I did self-study, right? And I think that's what I do recommend, is self-studying, because it allows you to sort of tailor your studying to your needs, right? And you're not bound by sort of any material or any timelines. So some of the suggested materials, which I think are very important, are Khan Academy. So Khan Academy is, again, partnered with AAMC, which is the official MCAT, like they make the MCAT. So they have a lot of passages, they have a lot of videos, which, if you need clarification on, for example, a certain topic, I would just go to Khan Academy, sort of watch a quick video, and I'm good about that. UWorld is also a very good resource. They have great practice exams. They also have great study questions. So definitely UWorld is something that I recommend. And official AMC resources, right? So AMC has a bunch of exams. They have practice exams, question banks, section banks, and a whole host of practice questions. And I truly, truly recommend that you invest in all of those things. And I'm not sure how it is this year, but I know in previous years you're able to sort of share those materials. So, again, with UWorld, or even with other testing companies you might go with to buy their practice exams or questions, you can, share up to 5 buddies, 10 people. So it can definitely decrease the costs that way. Again, another resource that I truly recommend is Reddit, which is the MCAT, Reddit MCAT stream. And it's basically the MCAT blog on Reddit. And it was truly helpful. It's sort of this community which shares resources, shares practice questions, sort of any questions you may have. Any question I had, Reddit would be the first source, right? So when you're studying for your MCAT, I recommend looking at Reddit 3 times a day, when you begin, before you start studying, when you take a break, and when you're done studying, because people post great resources, and it's really, really, I feel like a lot of people just brush it off. Next Step also has great exams. Again, just like UWorld. And the biggest thing I would say for cars, right? A lot of people had cars questions. So what I use for cars is, because I use Princeton for cars, I used EK for cars, but the single best thing that I found for cars was Testing Solutions, the 30-day cars guide. I believe it's like $8 on Amazon now. And it truly, it goes step by step what to study for over 30 days. And I think that significantly improved my score. I went from, I jumped almost I jumped 6 points on my, so I wrote it twice. So I jumped 6 points using this strategy the second time. So I definitely recommend Testing Solution. I think that is, like, for those who are worried about cars, that is definitely a recommendation for cars. And again, any other resources that you may find are equally as helpful, but these were the sort of the main ones that I've used. Um, yeah. So how my study schedule was sort of structured. So sort of, again, I took about 3 months to study. So it was about 6 hours for 3 months, about one third content review, about one third practice exams. And then again, one third was full length exams. So that's how much I would say this is about how much is appropriate, was appropriate for me. And I think would be appropriate for a lot of individuals as well. Um, and so this is a sample study schedule, right? So again, everyone has their own unique sort of needs and strengths and weaknesses. So for example, if you're stronger in psych, if you come from a psych background, perhaps you don't need as many days for psych as compared to biology, for example. So just don't get so worried about the exact dates. Rather, just see the overall trend. So you can see in the beginning, it was more content review, again, with a lot of practice questions I was doing at the same time. And then as I was done content review, I was moving on to full question banks and full lengths and then towards the end, which is again my recommendation, as you can see towards the end, you want to use your AMC resources, right? Because those are probably the closest things to the actual MCAT. So you want to leave the best and most accurate representations for the end, so you know what to expect going into your exam. So again, this is sort of my schedule: content review with questions, then sort of questions, moving on to full lengths, and then a lot of full lengths and a lot of practice towards the end. And again, practice is your best friend, right? Practice, practice, practice. Don't get bogged on reading, like learning on what a certain, like what is the atomic theory, right? For example, rather know how to apply it, right? Because MCAT, what they will do is a lot of times MCAT will just give you what they need in the passage. So if you guys are not familiar how MCAT is structured, is that there's passages, and then there's 5 to 6 questions associated with those passages, and this is true for all sections: chem, physics, bio, cars, and psych. And sometimes there might be standing question, like single questions as well, but most of the times it's passage and then questions associated with the passage. And the biggest skill and why practice is so important is because you need to have critical skills to analyze passages and extract the relevant information, so you can again apply it for the questions. So when people get concerned about, wow, like Princeton has like 5 thick books for content review, to be honest, you don't need to know all that content. What you need to know is how to apply it, because a lot of times content will be given. So yeah, so practice is your best friend. And that's why I devoted about 2/3 just doing practice of my time. So there's some sample questions. Again, I feel that it's not going to be sort of useful for you guys to go over practice questions, because a lot of times it's again passages and you answer the question. So that being said, I think that we'll skip the sample questions, but if you guys have any particular strategies on how to answer questions, we can go over that. But yeah, so that sort of concludes my presentation of MCAT. It was a very quick tips, what the MCAT is, and sort of my strategies. So if you guys have any questions, we can go over that. Okay, perfect. So I'm just looking at all the questions right now, just opening it up. Okay, perfect. So so the first question was sent was, how early before your test date do you think is good to finish content review, right? So I think, okay, so when we content review, I would say that you want to finish it in about the first 1/3 of your studying. And that doesn't mean that to know the content fully in and out. What I mean by that is just knowing the general gist of it. And if you guys, what I recommend is that AMC has official breakdown of what the contents are, right? So they tell you in bio, you need to do this, you need to learn this. So what I suggest is going on AMC content categories, right? Content categories, and they break it down what you need to learn. So if you go over those things, those objectives, if you know all those objectives in the first 1/3 of your studying, you should be great to go. And then you can go straight into practice questions. But also when you're doing content review, please make sure you're doing questions as well, whether it be passage questions or just standalone questions, because you need to get used to doing questions right away. because knowing content without application is useless for the MCAT, to be honest. So someone else asked, would 2.5, 2.5 to 3 months be good? So I think it really depends on how much time you're devoting. But I think if you're studying have a good schedule, 5 to 6 days, 7 hours a day, I think that should be great. Just make sure you stay, continue to, grind through it, stay motivated through it. And I think it should be fine, right? And it really depends. If you're coming from more of a science background, I think it might be easier to learn the bio and physics sections compared to if you're coming from more of a psych background, then learning bio might be a little bit longer. So it really depends where your strengths are, right? If you study the MCAT part-time, how do you keep up with content you might forget over time? So again, this is a very important question that a lot of people ask all the time. So people are scared, oh, if I learn content in the beginning, I'll forget. See, that's the important thing of doing practice questions, because as you do practice questions and as you do full lengths, you're going to be challenged to use the content that you learned in the first little while of your first 1/3 of your studying. So again, as long as you continue doing practice questions, as long as you continue doing practice exams, you should be fine. And speaking of that, a lot of people have questions like, oh, how many practice exams should I take, right? Or what practice exam should I go with? So I sort of went over what resources are helpful for practice exams, but I personally went over 12 full lengths, right? Including the AAMC ones. So that just gives you an idea about how many practice exams. Sometimes some people might feel 8 is adequate and they're getting the scores they need. And sometimes you might need more. So you really see how your progression in your scores are. And about the 12, after the 10th, 11th one, I felt like I was comfortable with what I was getting. And that was sort of my timeline. And I was writing the MCAT very soon. So I was pretty satisfied with 12. So it really depends. But I would say no less than 8 for sure. Do schools take all attempts? So in Canada, they take the most recent one. In America, though, there's a lot of nuances. I know that there's schools that take sort of averages, there's schools that take the most recent, there's schools that take the highest, and there's schools that only take certain sections. So for America, I think you need to do your research in terms of what schools you want to apply for, but Canada is definitely the most recent one. Do COVID tests due to shorter length have the same number of questions? So we went over the number of questions for how the COVID one was, but you know what? I'll just go over it again. So COVID one, as you can see here, COVID one is less questions and less time. So they took a lot of questions away from each of the sections, and not as many from cars, but the other sections have definitely been reduced. So they're reducing the questions to make it fair. Like there's no disadvantage of writing it right now. Is it true that AMC question packs are easier than the real exam? So there's a difference, right? So there's AMC question packs, which there's for cars and science, physics and all that. But then there's section banks, right? Those are two different things. So I felt the question packs were sort of a little bit on the easier side for sure. But the section banks were on par. And they have section banks, I believe, for chem. And I believe there's section banks for psych as well. Again, they might have updated this year. So definitely section banks are key, and they're probably the most accurate representations, in my opinion, to the actual MCAT. What was my score breakdown? So my score breakdown was sort of 520 overall. I got 130 on bio, 129 on cars, and then 131 on bio and biochem, and 130, I believe, 130 was psych. So that was my breakdown. Do you have any tips for physics? So I would say physics, go over the main topics. So physics, there's a lot of things. And if you pick up, for example, a Princeton book, it's like like a few hundred pages thick. And I don't think that's how much MCAT is going to test you, especially the new MCAT after the 2015 MCAT. Physics is complete, it's very little. So go over the major topics, right? So optics is a major topic, fluid dynamics, right? Thermodynamics, like all those things are important topics that you should have sort of a understanding on, but also how it applies in a sort of medical or biological sense. So for example, they won't just be like water is flowing through a pipe, Rather, they'll give you an example like what blood is flowing through a blood vessel. Calculate sort of drag on that, for example, right? So it's sort of a very biological spin, but still using the rudimentary and the fundamentals of the physics that they sort of have. And again, go over the content categories. Again, content categories on AMC, and they break it down on exactly what you need to know for physics. Know that, and you should be great. Which books do you suggest? So in my personal opinion, I suggest EK are sort of, I found the best books. I had Princeton and I had EK. And I found, I honestly, I picked up Princeton and I didn't even use it after the first few days. But EK I felt was good. But also there's a lot of notes on, again, that are shared on Reddit or on other online sources that a lot of people make their own study notes for MCAT, and I use those a lot. So see what are the most recent ones, and again, Reddit them, and there's a lot of people posting a lot of study notes, and I just use that, to be honest, and I found that to be super helpful. Would you mind going to the slide right before your sample study schedule? Sure. And so how I so I'm assuming that this is sort of my study schedule, but I think the question might be pertaining to this. So again, this is just sort of some of the questions, sort of the courses that the suggested self-study material that I recommend. And if you have any questions, just let me know. So why did you choose to attend men's school? I mean, there's a whole host of reasons, and I can go on for a long time, but I think I can just say there's a lot of personal reasons for me, and also my passion for, I guess, just working with people and all that combined. Did you take organic chemistry before? Yes, so I did. So I took I took at Western, they allow you to take organic chem 1 and 2, sort of split. And I took both of those in second year. I felt that Orgo 2, I'm not sure how Orgo 2 is in other programs, but how Orgo 2 was at Western, I felt was more accurately representative of the organic chemistry component of MCAT than Orgo 1. Orgo 1 was very, you know, mechanisms and very chem heavy, very Orgo heavy. And I don't think MCAT goes into that much detail at all. So definitely Orgo 2 I'd recommend, especially for my limited experiences at Western. What do you think is a recommended time to write the MCAT? I would say write it after third year. But again, I wrote it after second year as well. So it really depends on how do you feel like you went over the necessary courses? What commitments do you have during the summer? But again, if you have nothing going on in second year, you're not doing a lot of research, or if you just feel like you want to give it a try, why not, right? Especially if you're thinking of staying in Canada, then there's no harm in writing in second year. But if you're thinking about America, where they look at multiple scores, then you might want to be more strategic with when you write. Would you recommend voiding an exam? So I personally, again, it really depends on what your situation is. Again, if you're having a terrible headache and it was like you're completely off, I still don't know if you're only considering Canada, then I don't think I personally wouldn't void it, just because you've paid so many hundreds of dollars to write the MCAT, you've studied for it, and a lot of times why people might feel like they want to avoid it is because, oh, it didn't go well. But just remember, it's a standardized exam. So if it didn't go well for you, I'm sure it didn't go well for a lot of other people. So even if you didn't get a lot of questions right, it'll be adjusted to the curve, right? So if you did relatively better than everyone else, you're still going to get the good marks that you need, right? So I personally wouldn't void it. Again, nuances come in when you're talking about America and all that, but strictly Canadian speaking, I would not void it, especially after the money and time you invest in it, for sure not. What can I do to get a head start on my studying? I'm about to enter my first year. I mean, I think you should, like, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I really think that just for now, sort of just figure out, just, get used to the courses, get used to university life, just get used to bio, just get used to all whatever program you might be entering. Um, so head start in terms of the biggest head start start reading material though. That's important. Start reading books. If you don't, start reading critical pieces. So the New Yorker is a good website where they have new editorials that post. So definitely read things like that. All right, so get into reading. So that's the number one recommendation I would have. Start reading critical pieces where not just news, but like, something talking about arts, something talking about something else. So just generally start reading. Yeah. Is rewriting MCAT looked down upon? In Canada, no, not at all. What is the best way to improve cars? Again, practice, practice, practice. My quick 3 tips: do everything timed. Um, do cars at least do cars 5 passages every 2 days initially, and move on to more. But everything is timed, right? You don't. A lot of strategies will say do things untimed and then go into time. I personally recommend do everything timed. So it forces you to sort of adjust your skills and your strategies within a time frame, right? It's easy to get perfect car scores if you're giving 18 minutes to do one passage, right? But you're not. In the real MCAT, you're given about 8-9 minutes. So practice, again, testing solutions. 100% recommend. It's on the slide if you guys want to, right here. Again, Canada, most best attempt. What would you recommend for GPA? Again, just study hard. Again, take same thing as MCAT. It's a marathon, right? Even GPA is a marathon. Use the same things, tips that I said for MCAT to apply for GPA, to be honest. So I didn't use Anki. Someone's asking, did you use Anki? So I didn't use the Anki, which is sort of this a software that's sort of our flip cards to go over content. So I didn't use it, but a lot of my friends that did use it had very good things to say about it. And there are a lot of Anki cards that people have made already that are ready to download. So if you guys are very like flashcard, like Quizlets and things like that, then they might be useful for you. I just don't prefer that way of studying. Would you avoiding, I go to Western, going to med sci too, what electives I mean would be helpful for MCAT? So I feel like just looking at what the MCAT is asking you to sort of like bio, chem, physics, psych, like go over those stuffs, right? Like take courses that might help you with that. Because especially when it comes to content review, you'll see that if you take, like, for example, first year bio or second year biochem, a lot of MCAT, if not 100%, is going to be second year biochem, right? So sort of MCAT is designed so to be written after second year, or like you have the courses that you need after second year, typically for a science student, right? It really depends if you're coming from different streams and how you sort of do your course outline, courses selections. What did you find the best way to study content? Again, content categories from AAMC, again, so official AAMC resources, and other people's study notes that I found on Reddit and things like that. So those were super helpful. Did you use Khan Academy Psych? Okay, yes. So there is a Khan Academy Psych Soch document, right? So someone posted it's 300 pages of all the things. Again, so those are the things I'm talking about when you see notes. It's broken down according to content categories. So yeah, so use material like that. That will really help you, right? And the things with a lot of prep books is that sometimes they're not updated to the most recent MCAT, right? Like some of the Princeton review books, they might, you know, they not necessarily are they updated for the 2020 version. So you got to make sure whatever books you're using are for the most recent year, if you are going to go about that route. That's about all the questions that I see. If you're not sure if you talked about this, any tips for physics? Yeah, again, I said just go over content review, go over questions. Again, questions is important, guys. It's easy, in my opinion, it's easy to read. Like, I personally found that it's easy to sort of read like chapters, right? Just memorizing stuff. It's like, it's fun to do kind of, right? But when it comes to doing questions, that's kind of the harder part, right? And that's what you need to challenge yourself. Continuously do questions, practice questions. If I did physics, for example, if I did review for 2 hours physics, then, you know, let me do 2 passages of physics, right? And when I talk about these passages, go to Khan Academy, go to UWorld, go to, for example, if you invested in some books, go to the back of those books. They have a lot of passages. Go to Next Step, like find those passages. There's a whole host of passages available for you, and these are the ones I recommend, and do them. Do passages, because that's what you're going to be doing on the actual date. Did you try using EK verbal reasoning for cars? So I did. So yeah, so when I say testing solutions, it's sort of a guide, right? So they have some practice exams and stuff, but what I use testing solutions was sort of, I literally follow them to the T in terms of, this is how they said to sort of study for cars. So, you know, these are the strategies to implement. This is what to look for, this is what not to do. So that's what when I mean testing solution, I'm not talking about just their practice, like their exams and their questions, but more so their strategies. So I did use EK book for practice, right? I used EK book for practice. I used Khan Academy for practice, AMC resources for practice. So there's a whole host. And what I also did was that Princeton Review gives, I think, three or four free exams and things like that when you buy the books, and you can try free exams, like sign up for a trial. So what I did a lot of times was, I knew I didn't want to do a full length from Princeton, but what I did was I would get the 4 exams and then use the cars section only, and just do a cars exam out of it. Sorry. So you can do that if you have a lot of exams that you're not going to use, like, like I would recommend using Next Step, UWorld before you look into Princeton. Then use the Princeton ones as just practice passages, right? You don't need to do full length. Just do them as practice, and that's, you have, like, again, now you have a full length with so many passages to practice. How many questions should you be doing while doing content review? So I believe that you should be doing, so initially when you're doing content review, I would say about whatever you study. For example, if you want to go over biochem content categories, like, again, when I talk about AMC official resources content category, you'll see how it's broken down. And I base my content review on those categories. So I'll be like, okay, I'm going to do content category of physics 1 to 2, for example. So then I would basically do passages, maybe 2 or 3 passages pertaining to those subject matters, right? So do 2 or 3 passages. So that's about what, like 15, 20 questions. But then I would also do side questions at the end of books and whatnot. So it really depends on how much you studied that much day, how much time you have, but at least 3 to 4 passages for the material you studied. What is the best way to prep for MCAT if I'm not in a science program? So I think that's a great question, because a lot of MCAT takers are actually, there are many that are not in science programs. And I really think that MCAT, I believe, doesn't put you at a significant disadvantage or any disadvantage if you don't come from a truly science background, because a lot of things that MCAT wants you to know in terms of knowledge that you would learn from undergrad programs or other programs can be found on their website, right? The content carrier. So if you learn that, you should be fine. And and in terms of, if you're not coming from a science program, perhaps I might suggest that, spend a little bit more time with content review, right? So because you might not have those foundations in biochem or physics or whatnot. So definitely spend a little bit more time on content review and do more practice as well, right? So coming from a science background in all means that you just need to devote a little bit more time. That's all. Other than that, there's no disadvantage or anything like that. There's chats. How will the sessions be shared? I mean, I believe they will be shared through a video, so I'm not sure about that, but I believe Leo can guide you in that. Any advice for a person rewriting the MCAT? So any advice for people rewriting the MCAT? So look at what you guys, what was the shortcomings? Was it cars? Was it, another section? So definitely when you're studying again for the MCAT, definitely hone in into the places that you sort of need improvement. So if you're needing improvement in cars, for example, then, do more cars practice exams. Do more cars practice. Look at strategies that you can incorporate rather than just completely changing your strategies, which sometimes can be futile and can take a lot of time. Incorporate other new strategies into your already existing strategies to improve it. And again, practice, right? If you felt that you did too much content the first time around, then decrease the number of content, because you probably already kind of remember a little bit of that, and focus more on review or on practice exams. If studying does not go well, would you recommend not writing it this year and trying again? So I mean, I understand there's a whole host of reasons why studying, there might be like impact, like things that can sort of hinder studying. It really depends what situation you're in. I mean, if you paid for it and there's no way to reschedule it, and you've devoted, like, say 2 months already, and it's only and you only have a few weeks out of the MCAT left, then I mean, like, you've already invested so much time into it. Might as well just write it, right? See what you can improve on. And again, depends where you're applying, right? So you got to consider, if I don't get the highest score and have to rewrite, am I at a disadvantage? And if you're not, then go for it, right? Why not? You'll learn something, right? Rather than nothing. So yeah. is UW MedSci reflective of your efforts? Yeah, there's usually a lot of debates between, some schools you can get easier GPAs, lower GPAs, like U of T, for example. Someone said, uh, I mean, like, I feel like every school is like, you have to, um, uh, I feel like to get like the GPA, it really depends on the course load you're taking, and there's a whole host of factors. But I think if you continue to, you study hard and put your efforts in, just like you have to do for the MCAT, you'll sort of, get the GPAs and things that you're looking for, right? And if you don't, then you'll see where you can improve on, and again, improve on it from next time, right? So